When I was 21 years old I would be home, alone at my parents' house a lot we lived, on a little pond which was directly in our backyard. On the other side of the pond was a little town park. Our neighbors were a bit spaced out. It was a pretty upscale expensive block compared to the rest of the town, so the properties were big. I'm fully moved out now, but this was back when I was in college. My parents make a lot of money, and we have multiple homes, so often I was home alone. It was a random night in the summertime. I was off from school, so I can't remember if it was the weekend or a weekday, but odds are since I was home it was a random weekday. I was in the back sunroom watching a show. That was my favorite room in the house in the summer because it was the most cozy and had the best breeze with all the windows open. I was right on the corner of the couch closest to the corner window when I heard splashing from outside, like in the pond. It could have been a goose or duck. Sometimes they'd fight in the water and make a bunch of splashing sounds, so at first I ignored it, but as it persisted I decided to lower the volume on the TV and listen. I put my ear up to the window even, and I heard consistent splashing sounds, way too heavy to be from a duck or goose. It sounded like they were splashes from a person. I opened the door in the sunroom and stepped outside to the deck. I looked out to the pitch darkness of the backyard. I now heard a man's humming. Along with the splashes, someone was definitely swimming in the water. They were trespassing. Each house on the pond owned a specific chunk of the pond. I stepped inside for a second to flick on the lights to the backyard deck. As I did this, just a bit of the pond was exposed and the splashes and humming stopped. Whoever it was clearly saw me. I wondered if it was one of the neighbors going for a swim or something, which also just seemed weird because no one really swam in the pond ever. But honestly, whether it was or wasn't a neighbor, I wasn't going to confront whoever it was. I stepped back inside and turned off the lights, of course locking the door as well. I texted my brother, who was away at college, about it. He didn't answer right away. I was trying not to creep myself out over it, but watching TV after this was kind of hard. I couldn't focus on the show. I looked out the window, but all I could see outside was darkness. I still had the TV on in the background, not really realizing how revealing the light from the TV would be outside. And then I thought I heard something on the deck. I hurried to find the remote and turn off the TV, and as the room went black and silent, it took me a few seconds to adjust and realized that there was the sound of someone's heavy breathing right outside one of the many windows in the room. I instantly laid down flat on the couch to try and hide myself, and after a short moment of silence a deep voice from outside the window said, "I see you." My heart dropped into my stomach. I couldn't decide in the moment whether to speak or keep hiding, so I just blurted out, "Paul, is that you?" Paul was the name of one of our neighbors. I said this clinging on to the hope that maybe it was him and he was just messing with me, but the man outside didn't respond to this. I just heard footsteps walking away. As the barefoot-sounding footsteps faded to silence, I still laid flat on the couch, too afraid to move. I laid for a few minutes before the thought to go check that all the doors were locked came to mind. I exploded off the couch and ran straight for the front door. It was locked, as was the side entrance door. After a little while longer and texting my entire family about what was going on, my dad told me brought a big knife outside with me onto the deck, and I looked down. There were wet footprints that had half dried by then, but I could tell that they were barefoot footprints. I followed the trail footprints around to the side part of the deck, and what I saw was nightmare fuel. The top part of someone's head, namely their eyes and forehead, was peering just over the edge of the deck from the ground below, looking at me as if he heard me coming and was waiting. As we made eye contact, he turned away, and by now I was ready to call 911. I did so before even telling my parents. I locked myself inside waiting for them, and when they came I felt instantly better. They asked if our family had any enemies or people who don't like us, or if we have any problem neighbors. Questions like this. They did do a quick sweep of the property and then left. I decided to shut every window that night. And run the air conditioning just for added safety. When I awoke the next morning, I was just delighted to see sunlight. I don't believe that man ever returned to our house, and we still don't know who it could have. Night. I begin our final walk of the day and go our usual route. I have a flashlight with me as there are no lights at the parking lot, and I'm listening to music with only one AirPod, as I feel it would be for the best just in case I heard something unusual. And I did. As I'm approaching the parking lot, I was hearing something, a voice of some kind that was up ahead of me, but I was completely zoned out in my own world of music as it was happening. But then my mind finally caught up. And the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me yet was hearing a muffled voice of what sounded like a kid say the word help. My heart dropped so fast I couldn't move my legs. I frantically pointed my flashlight everywhere to see where it was coming from. I was sure it was coming from the cars, but I was completely thrown off by this. But there wasn't a kid in sight or anyone nearby. It was just me and my dog, who didn't seem to notice anything as he was just sniffing some bushes nearby. And then I heard it again. The word help was spoken 3 more times, and it was coming from my left side where the cars were parked. It made me panic even more. I didn't know what to think of it, and I knew I wasn't imagining this when I saw my dog's ears perked up and he was looking in the same direction I was facing after it happened. And that's when it hit me about how incredibly eerie all this was. After hearing it multiple times, I realized the kid's voice didn't sound entirely like a kid. I don't know how to explain it, but it was like the mix of an adult and a child at the same time. And each time they called for help, not only was the voice always muffled, but it was spoken in a more generic statement as opposed to a cry for actual help every time. And I mean that literally. There was absolutely no change in the tone, inflection, sound, or anything of sorts. My dog and I ran straight home afterwards, and I tried to explain to my mom what happened. Was puzzled herself about what it could have been, and I suggested we call the cops on the off chance that there was actually someone in need of help, but she didn't think it was necessary. So many questions were conjuring up in my head. Why was the voice muffled? Was there someone in the car that I couldn't see, or was it something darker waiting for me to move closer? I don't like to think too much about it, but whatever it was, it still makes me feel extremely disturbed to this day. This picture is where I had stopped and taken my AirPods out to listen, and I heard it up ahead on the left. This is where I had gotten closer and heard it on my left side. I'm aware that there's a condo complex on the right side which some may think the noise was coming from, but it was in this direction facing the cars where my dog and I heard it. And you could see from this point of view that there's nothing to really indicate a noise coming from somewhere else. Also, at the time this happened, the cars that were parked were trucks and SUV types, so they were a lot larger and covering more space, thus making it harder to see from where I was standing. I never figured this out. What I'm about to tell you is the reason why my parents moved out of a house that was in the family for 3 generations. I've struggled with depression most of my life. It's hard for me to shake the feeling of being useless. I'm doing much better now, but when I was a kid it was horrible. Because of that, I spent a lot of time alone in my room. My house was nestled in a very woodsy area. There were trees on 3 sides of it, and a forest separating it from any neighbors. My room was pretty big for a bedroom. It was in the back corner of the house, so the windows on 2 walls faced the woods. It was honestly pretty scary. For a kid my age, it didn't help that I was also scared of the dark. Things started happening when I was around 10 or so. I was in the 5th grade, and I was at the age where it wasn't acceptable to sleep in my parents' bed after a nightmare, but I was still accused of having an active imagination. The first thing I noticed was my nightlight. It had different color settings, so if I wanted I could change the LED around. I liked keeping it on red, which is what I fell asleep to most nights. One night though, I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, which was unusual for me. I was really tired and Imagination. The first thing I noticed was my night light. It had different color settings, so if I wanted I could change the LED around. I liked keeping it on red, which is what I fell asleep to most nights. One night though I woke up randomly in the middle of the night, which was unusual for me. I was really tired and fell back asleep in under a minute, but before I did I noticed that my night light was a different color than the red I always left on. I didn't think much of it until about a week later. One morning I woke up and realized my night light was once again not set to red, like it always was. I asked my parents why they were messing with my night light, but they were confused and told me they didn't know what I was talking about. I explained what had happened to them and they told me that the thing had always been glitchy. They knew best, so I accepted that answer for a while, at least until one morning after waking up to see my night light unplugged completely. It was just sitting there on the floor. Once again my parents dismissed my concern and told me my brain should be focused on school. My dad said I was getting too old for a nightlight anyway. A few days later my nightlight was missing completely. It had seemingly evaporated out of existence. Now I knew my parents were lying to me. They probably thought I should have outgrown the nightlight by then and took matters into their own hands. This incident caused a massive fight between them and I. Since both of us accused the other of hiding it and neither of us was budging, I couldn't believe my parents would blatantly lie to me about something like this, but there was nothing I could do after that. Things went back to normal for a week. That didn't last long though. 3 nights in a row I woke up randomly in the middle of the night. Each time I had no idea what was waking me up. After it happened a 4th time in a row I told my parents. They told me that I was going through puberty and that changes to my body are